and fluffy and responsive. Anyone couldn't make a speech before you now, he just as well quit. I was reading a book up there before I came down, and I'm not going to quote verbatim, but the book said that the love of God never let anybody down. And that is very encouraging to ordinary sinners. Then it said that God's love never let anybody off. And that is quite discouraging to respectable sinners. Then it said that God's love never let anybody go. And that is wonderfully comforting to those who are so deep in sin that they feel hopeless and lost and helpless. He never lets anybody go. Let us pray. Father, give us courage tonight. Give us poise. Give us restraint. Give us a deep sense of maturity. And a deep sense of witness. For Jesus' sake, amen. If anybody achieves anything on his own power, it is necessary, if he mentions it to an audience, to preface the remarks with, ladies and gentlemen, if you will pardon a personal reference. If he doesn't do that, he'll be condemned for exaggerated egotism. But when he doesn't achieve anything and God achieves it through it, there's no apologies to be offered. Can you try to imagine St. Paul after he had had his experience on the Damascus Road, addressing his first audience and saying, ladies and gentlemen, if you will pardon a personal reference, I was on the road to Damascus. And a great light shined round about me. It would be absurd, wouldn't it? No apologies when God does it through us. So there are no apologies for the remarks I'm going to make tonight. The theme of this talk is really spiritual darkness, spiritual blindness. When I was in Chicago, I saw a young blind man on State Street passing out tracts. Well-dressed young man with a white cane. And the derelicts and bums on the skid row were making their way to the rescue mission for coffee and stale bread. Their faces were all in the gutter along the pavement. He was standing there well dressed and bright with no eyesight, and he was telling them about Jesus. Once in a while one would stop and take a track in a dull, stupid sort of way, and then mosey on toward the mission. He had great sight. The rest were spiritually blind, though they had eyes. Jesus is passing by, and the blind see him not. He went down from Jericho, and there were two blind men on the side of the road. And there was a great crowd, a multitude. They were kicking up the dust. You could smell it. Thousands of people. You could smell the sweat from their bodies and the sweat rising up from the animals. And there was a great pandemonium of voices. The racket was a din. And one of these blind men cried out against that terrible noise, "O Son of David, have mercy on me." The other blind man said, "Shut up. The most famous man in Judea is passing by." He is surrounded by celebrities from all over the East and Near East. Thousands of people. He is the most popular figure in these parts, and he's lost in that crowd and that noise. How can you expect him to hear what you're saying? And he paid no attention. He said, "O Son of David, have mercy on me." And when he said it the second time, Jesus stopped. And the noise all faded down, the dust settled. There was something like a great Sabbath lull fell upon that great noisy crowd. And Jesus said, "I hear a need somewhere. Who is that calling?" And they led the blind man forth at his request, at the request of Jesus, and brought him up to Jesus. And Jesus stood him right in front of him there in the midst of that great crowd. And he asked him what he wanted. The blind man said, "I'd like to see." And Jesus got up close to him. He cupped his hands under his chin, lifted his face up. "All right, see." And the blind man opened his eyes, and the first thing he had ever seen in this world was the face of God. And immediately he became a disciple and followed Jesus. Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And oddly enough, he may not pass our way again. Spiritual blindness is far worse than any physical blindness. He said, "If the eye offend, pluck it out." For it is far better to be physically blind than spiritually blind. and Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And it may be our misfortune to let him pass. And it may be our misfortune never to see him pass our way again, because of the darkness of our eyes, inner eyes, and the hardness of our hearts. Now I know what spiritual blindness is. If any man on earth knows what it is, I do. For the eyes of my spirit were blind. The eyes of my soul were blind. And Jesus of Nazareth passed by, and I let him pass. I let Christ pass and crime stop. I chose crime instead of Christ, and Christ went on. Now what causes boys and girls and young men to enter into crime? What is the cause of it? Well, it's sin. That's an easy explanation. Crime is exaggerated sin. It is separation from God. That's what crime is. And crime is a low degree of that separation. What causes it? What causes this sin to enter into an individual's life and not enter into another individual's life? What causes these slums to produce Al Capone and side by side an Abraham Lincoln? What causes one brought up in the best surroundings in a Christian home where there is prayer and love and where every advantage is given, and that one turns to crime, while another is brought up in the slums with drunken parents where there's been no prayer, no religion, nothing but sordid degradation, and that one becomes a great leader, a great disciple of Christ, a great servant of God and man. Well, I don't know really what caused me to enter into crime. I have speculated a great deal about it. I did the same thing that my boyfriends did. We all did the same thing. We played hooky, we lied, we cussed, we chewed. We robbed birds' nests and raided orchards and did all those things. But out of it all, I was the only one in my town that went wrong. All the rest made good. Some of them really good from the standpoint of the world. And I went wrong. One of the reasons, I think, and it's only an opinion, because I don't know what the mystery of crime is. In fact, I don't know what it is. And I don't really know what causes it. It may be physical deficiency of some kind, who knows? It may be glandular. It may be some psychological weakness, some predisposition to something or other. But when I was about 5 years old, my stepmother took me to her church. I was baptized in the Methodist church, went to Sunday school there, and her church was a branch, kind of a carbuncle that had been squeezed off of the main body of Methodism. It's like a boil. And it was a rip-roaring affair. They really got religion there. And the preacher there was about 6 feet, 8 or 9 inches. I think he was almost 7 feet tall. So I remember him. His sleeves were too short. He had a swallowtail coat, and the sleeves were short. A pair of black pants, and the pant legs were too short. I remember him vividly. Even the back of the coat was shiny when he turned and walked up and down. The picture is indelibly impressed upon my mind. He was a strange creature. One of the most curious men I believe I've ever seen. Made a tremendous impression on me. And my teacher had read the story Ichabod Crane to us in school. And it seemed to me that he was Ichabod. He wore a celluloid collar that was yellow with age around the edge, and it was huge like a horse collar. And an enormous Adam's apple went up and down inside that collar. And I tried to draw my stepmother's attention to the Adam's apple, and she grimly hushed me. And he preached on hell. He was a dramatic artist. I've never known anyone before or since who could draw such a vivid picture of hell. He knew so much about it that even in my young mind, I got the impression that he must have been there. Or he could not describe it that way. It was a box canyon-like affair. Seemed to be no bottom to it. The walls were sheer and slick. No one could climb up. And the only way out was up, and no one could hang on to the wall. And he described all the people that had ever been on earth who hadn't known Jesus, who had been born on earth before Jesus came. And they were all there. And everybody else was there except those who belonged to this church. And thinking back on it now, it occurs to me that that church should have been there. It was the most dilapidated affair that anyone ever saw. And they were screeching and screaming. And then he really lit in on sin. He was a hellfire and brimstone man. And he bore down on it. Scared everybody to death in the place. And I went in there without sin, and I came out with nothing but sin. I went in there without fear and came out with 3 phobias. Afraid of the dark, afraid of death, afraid of being locked into a place like that. And in order to get rid of those phobias, about the age of 8 or 9, my personality began to face the things I feared. I was afraid of sin, so I became a complete sinner. Never got rid of sin that way. I was afraid of the dark, so I prowled in the dark, always with one eye open. I was afraid of death, so I was facing death around every corner. The guns of my fellows in the underworld at my back. The hangman's noose here, the electric chair over here, the bullets of the policeman over here, hemmed in by death. I was afraid of being locked in without any possible way to escape, no exit, like those people in that hell. And I was locked in 14 years of my life. No way to get out. Like a rat in a cage. Sweating all night in nightmares until I'd go to sleep exhausted. An utter coward, and yet having to conceal that from my compatriots in crime and wear a mask of bravado. Unable to share with anybody. Many a night, I had to choke myself to keep from screaming. The fear, cyclones, tornadoes, tidal floods, fire, earthquake, everything else. I would conjure that all up in my mind. And I never got rid of any of those fears. I carried those fears for a quarter of a century through the underworld. And the longer I carried them, the worse they got. Living a life of complete sham, making it appear that I was brave on the outside, and on the inside I was a cringing, whimpering, whining coward. And that's what I was. And no one ever found it out on me. They considered me in the police world to be a bad actor. In the world of prison society, I was not fooled with very much. In order to keep up my reputation, I would bash a head in or stick a knife between the shoulders of a man in a minute, just to keep up a reputation. Never got rid of the fears. They got worse. All the time, these 25 long, weary, bleak, and dreary years, my father, who was a devout Methodist, prayed the prayer of the knocking prayer. He knocked. For 25 years, he prayed for me. And every prayer, he said, was disappointed. Every service he rendered me was rewarded with injury. He spent a sizable fortune trying to keep me out of trouble. And I only delivered wounds for his kindness. And all that time, he never breathed a word of criticism. There was never even a thought of condemnation of me. His faith seemed to be strong. His heart was stout. He never judged me, and he didn't advise me. He didn't counsel goodness. The only thing he said was one time, the nearest he came to counseling me, he said, when I was 17, I was converted at the altar in a revival meeting. and received a definite call to the ministry and rejected the call. And somehow or other, I have always felt that because I rejected that call, I might have been responsible for your trouble. And I allowed him to take the blame. I didn't try to disillusion him. That supplied me with a very good excuse, a very good alibi. I let him take it. Never any judgment, no condemnation, nothing but prayer and love and faith. And he never saw or never knew of his prayer being answered. The next to the last time I was in prison, he came to receive me. Father was a very sentimental man. He was very tender-hearted. He could read one of the sob sister novels of that day, and he'd cry about it. If the heroine got pursued too closely by the villain, Father'd cry, and he'd try to save her. He was very tender, so he couldn't go into the prison. He stayed up in the reception room. There received me. And on the train on the way home, he told me about my mother's death. We didn't have Pasteur in those days, and bed fever claimed many mothers. And bed fever claimed my mother at birth, my birth. And he said she thought, he told me what a beautiful character she was. Wonderfully sensitive, he said, to spiritual things. Very devout. Lived a clean, pure life. And he said she felt that her going was destiny. That her light going out was bringing my light in. And he said she felt that there was something for you to do for the Lord. And she made me promise that I would see to it that you had every chance that could be given. And he said there, at her deathbed, as her last breath was going out, I made that promise that I would do it. Now, he said, I don't want you to make good this time for my sake. I want you to make good for your mother's sake. In 2 or 3 days, I was in jail again. And it was for committing one of the cheapest and most tawdry burglaries I'd ever committed. Was caught red-handed in the act, and as soon as he could get there, Father came to see me. He had aged 10 years in a few hours. As he approached the bars, he came around in the outer corridor and stood before my cell, and his shoulders were all broken in, as Christian like that. His chest seemed like it was caved in. He wouldn't look at me, and he couldn't speak. He just put his hands through the bars and held my hands, and his hands were burning hot. I can feel them in my palms today. And it seemed to me as I held them in my cold hands that his hands were withering in mine. His face was a mask of indescribable suffering, and his eyes were actually glazed with pain. I didn't have sense enough to know it, but if I had had one brain cell working, I would have been able to see crucifixion standing before me. And the cross upon which he was crucified was myself. I had finally broken his great stout heart. I had crucified my own father. He couldn't speak. He couldn't trust himself to speak. His eyes just dripped tears, and he suffered. Then he slowly withdrew and went through the brief proceedings of court where I pleaded guilty, sat in the courtroom that was crowded with people who came just to see him suffer. There he sat beside me under the leveling gaze of this vulgar scrutiny in a public courtroom. People pouring pity upon him and criticism. And he took it. When they were taking me away in handcuffed to the sheriff, he went to the train. And at the train he said, "Son, I won't see you anymore. I am going to be with your mother, and we are going to pray that somehow, some way, in the loving providence of God, we'll meet you over there." My attitude was that of bewilderment. I couldn't imagine a man with as well posted as my father, as well read, as well educated, talking such what to me was nonsense over there, over where, I thought. To me, there was no God. To me, when you were dead, you were dead. To me, a human being was nothing more than any other beast. When you died, you died. And that was the end of you. I had come to the place of complete rejection of any kind of a future life, good, bad, or indifferent. And I was confused by this remark over there. I'm going to be with your mother. To me, she was dead. And when he died, he'd be dead. So I got on the train and saw him no more. He went to a hospital soon after that, and one morning he called for a calendar that was hanging on the wall. The nurse gave it to him, and he wrote his funeral remarks to be read by his lodge. And then he wrote his final word to me, a beautiful document, pure love, such large soul generosity you could hardly find in words. He didn't finish it. The last word was God that he wrote, but he didn't get that finished. The D was not added. And the pencil dropped from his hand. Some weeks after that, I was in solitary confinement. And I had been strung up by the wrists like this, and rings in the back of the cell, with the balls of my feet barely scraping the floor. The arteries in my arms like great whip cards, my legs swollen clear to the hips and black and blue. And underneath my feet, the balls of my feet and the palms of my feet were like great turgid tumors filled with black congealed blood. The doctor kept coming in there and testing my heart and saying to the deputy warden he could take one more day. The next morning he'd come back and test my heart again. He could take another day. And that went on day after day, adding to the torture. Finally, he said, tested my heart a final time, he said, this heart cannot pump blood out into these dead members. Another 12 hours, you've got to let him down. So they took my hands out of the rings and I collapsed like an empty sack. And there I lay, emaciated beyond all human form, just a skeleton, just a bunch of dirty bones, hadn't washed in all the time I'd been there, had even been forced to exercise bodily functions just as I was. Filth, lice, and even rats. Frost in the walls, the ceiling wet and dripping, the floor slimy. Nothing was left of me but the will to hate. And I hated. I hated everybody, including God. And especially did I hate that deputy warden and the man who was in charge of that dungeon. And in that condition, I became hysterical. And I began to dream all kinds of dreams. Terrible dreams, fantastic dreams. Then they'd become a little bit beautiful, and then they'd get grotesque again. And I just wandered off in these dreamy, hysterical states. And the dreams would become kind of beautiful and kind of connected, like a vision. And this kind of inward mental activity went on for a long while. And while it was going on, I became aware, or thought that I became aware, that there was no dungeon there anymore. And it seemed to me that it was a beautiful garden. And I was lying in the grass just having a good time. And it seemed to me that the door was a barred door, and outside a solid wooden door. And it seemed to me that that became a great big rock. And my face was drawn to it, and I saw some activity in the rock. And this activity took form. And then I knew it was a person. And the person pressed through the rock and came over and stood right close to me and above me, and looked down and drew my skeleton face with their empty black sockets up to his eyes. I looked, and I looked into his eyes and read the secret of salvation, the only secret of salvation. It was an unimaginable compassion. I knew my father was a Christ-like man. For Jesus appeared to me in presence without condemnation, without criticism, without judgment. He spoke no word. He merely baptized me with compassion. And in a moment's time, what society had been trying to do for a quarter of a century and couldn't do through punishment, which had only made me worse and more bitter, Jesus did in the twinkle of an eye. Every fear vanished. And I have come to know that there is no power under the sun that can heal a phobia except the power of God. Only perfect love can cast out that kind of fear. And he cast it out and he set me free. He took crime out of me as though I were a sponge, and he dipped me down in water and then just squeezed it out. When he was gone, there was not an ounce of crime left in me. Not a speck, not a drop. It was all gone. And all the terrible habits that were associated with it were gone. And the terrible blindness that had been upon me was gone. That dungeon was full of radiance and light. So great was the light that it drew the keeper of the hole to the door time after time he'd look in, drawn by that light. And it was the light of my own inner splendor that had been released by this baptism of love. And it was only a little while until the deputy warden came and said, "He's had enough, take him to the hospital." I had lived in that prison right under the guard's nose in the first cell at the head of the cell block, always under observation, always seeking to escape. Took me to the hospital. And later I was trusted to become the night nurse of that hospital. I carried keys to the dispensary, had access to narcotics, to grain alcohol, to bonded whiskey. No one was in that hospital at night with me except one guard. I had more power than he had, for he was not allowed to carry a key to any medicine cabinet in the place. The state surgeon who came always operated with me in the room. I administered the anesthetic. I assisted him in all operations. And during all the time that I was there and he was performing surgical operations, we never lost a man. And the death rate in surgery in a prison hospital is high because the aftercare is often very careless. There was one man who brought over from the solitary confinement with locked bowels and peritonitis. I'm eating the bread over there. And the surgeon took his temperature and examined him and said, "He has pneumonia, we can't operate, we must let him die." And I said, "Isn't there any other kind of anesthetic than we used ether?" He said, "There is a new anesthetic out, sodium amytal. It was just then being used. And he said, I think I can get it in the town down here. But he said, even at that, he has only one chance in a million to live with peritonitis. I said, Doctor, take that one chance. And he did. That man was sewed up with 20-day catgut. And he was up and out of bed in 10 days. 10-day catgut would have done it. In performing that operation, while he performed the operation, all this inflammation in there was so, this poison all over there, in that area. And I just prayed silently and watched the surgeon's hands. And it seemed to me, as he was operating, that the hands of Jesus were superimposed upon his hands, and they just operated with perfect precision. Perfect. I had never seen such poise in a man. His face was lighted. His concentration was just perfect. And when he got through, he did something he had never done before. He turned with his hands, the rubber gloves on, started to the washroom, changed his mind, went out and got on the elevator with these gloves. He'd just finished operating, and went down and hid himself in the physician's office. I don't know what he did, but he was in a strange overshadowing. All sorts of things like that happened after that experience. I kept notes on 3 diaries while I worked in that hospital. 2 of them have been published. One is called The Way of Holy Affection. The other, Through Valleys to Victories, which tell of some of the experiences that went on in that hospital. How men were loved into health. How enemies were wooed out of enmity. And one of the most miraculous transformations of character took place in there under love. An old friend of mine in the underworld who turned against me when this religious experience came, called it a sham, called me a weakling, said I didn't get religion, I just went yellow. And he had whispered all kinds of whispering campaigns, and had 2 men, aroused, excited 2 men until they attacked me. One of them attacked me with a lead pipe. Another tried to attack me with a knife, and neither one of them wounded me very seriously. I kept loving him. He was my enemy, most bitter enemy I had in the institution. And I kept loving him, praying for him. Finally, one night I came on duty and he was in bed with 2 beautiful stomach ulcers. He had been taking baking soda and hot water until the lining of his stomach had become burned and the ulcers resulted. And I went in the room and looked at him, and he looked at me. I don't know what thoughts were going through his mind, but whatever they were, I encouraged them. I intimated that there was a little black bottle, and that the death certificates that were issued there were issued on very flimsy evidence. I said, even I can pronounce a patient dead here. There's never any investigation, I told him. They go from here to the ice house, and that's it. I don't know what he was thinking. But this I do believe that he was thinking, well, this fellow better have a religious experience. this thing better be real. And I let him stew and kept praying and loving him. One night he called me and he said, somehow or other, he said, I get the notion you're genuine. I don't know how I get it, but it seems I've been watching you, and it seems to me that you're real. But it's hard for me to believe. I thought, well, that's a little repentance. Another night he called me and he said, you were empty inside, weren't you? I said, yes. And cold? I said, yes. He said, you didn't have any soul, did you? I said, no. He said, I'm like ice inside. I said, yes, I know. I know exactly what it is. And it's an awful feeling. And I left him. Another night he called and he said, if this could happen to you, why couldn't it happen to me? I said, it can. He said, would you let me talk to you? He said, you know, I've never been sentimental. Crime has been my life. I said, yes, you can talk. And he told me the story of his background. He had been converted and called to the ministry as a boy. Went to high school with his mind aimed at that profession. Went to college with that in view. Finished his work in seminary and became a preacher. The faith that he had when he was converted, a primitive faith, unspoiled, unspotted faith, he began to lose in the last year in high school. When he got into college, his faith began to be corroded by his studies of science and philosophy, until eventually there wasn't anything left. He read and studied his faith away. So he had a beautiful system of theology without any power. He had neither love nor faith. He said that he was a very capable preacher, had a large congregation, and preached to a full sanctuary every Sunday. And he said he'd stand at the door and shake hands with the flock as they came out, and they would always say, your sermon impressed my mind greatly today. And he said once in a while I would ache and wonder if one would ever say, you moved my heart today. But he moved no man's heart. And he didn't save a soul. Not a single soul was brought into the kingdom out of his ministry. He became nervous, defeated, and self-condemning. He knew that he was standing in the robes of hypocrisy, preaching in a respectable conventional church to the already saved, or who thought they were. And he was doing nothing, actually, for God. He became increasingly nervous and irritable. He had married and began to take his nerves out on his wife. He became a confirmed nagger and an alibi buck passer, blaming her for everything. And yet, because of his profession, his position, he wouldn't get a divorce. Wouldn't let her get one. She finally got so fed up and so defeated herself with this kind of life, living with him in torment, that she took sick with some minor little ailment of some kind, and without the will to live, died on his hands. He went into a nervous breakdown, and he knew that he had killed her just as though he had driven a dagger into her heart. And when he came out of that, he was absolutely disgusted with the ministry and with religion. He went into selling, from selling to drinking, from drinking to gambling, and from gambling to forging. And at this time, he was serving his third hitch on a forgery charge. He told me the story. I listened. He was repenting. He wouldn't say that he was, but he was. He was confessing to God. I was just an instrument there, an object. But he was pouring this out to God. Then one night he called me and he asked me if I would pray for him. I told him that I didn't know much about prayer, that the type of praying that I did was more meditation than prayer, but that I'd be glad to do the best I could. I'd talk to the Lord about him if he wanted me to. And he said, I want you to. And I just scooped him up in the bed, my left arm, leaned him over, and his forehead was on my right knee, which I had up on the bed. And then I put the left hand at the back of his head, and my right hand over his stomach and those ulcers. And I said, Jesus, this is all I know to do. This is as far as I can go. This man needs help. He's asked for it. And the only thing I can say is, help him. This hand grew red hot. This one grew red hot. Pretty soon his neck, I thought he'd died. His neck twisted. His head went over like that on my knee. His body was as limp as a rag, and I let him down on the pillow and pulled the covers over him, and he was sound asleep. The first sleep that man had had in years. I watched him all night, and he just stayed in that one place and slept and slept and slept. Next morning, I went off duty at 6 o'clock and stayed on till 7, and then stayed on to 8. And he was still in that position. I went on to bed at 8. I came back on the ward about 4 o'clock to look after him, and the day nurse said that he woke at 10 o'clock. His ulcers were gone. He was absolutely healed of spiritual blindness. He was transformed completely. He was a new creature in Christ. He had been the greatest missionary for the devil in that institution. And he now became the greatest missionary in that institution for Christ. He would win those young kids through his knowledge of the Bible All that theology, all that Bible reading, all that study came now with power behind it. And he would win them to Christ as though they had no resistance, no way to resist him. During the time that I remained there, I imagine that he won 150 into conversion experiences to Christ. And he was still going strong. I asked him if he wanted to get out, and he said, it makes no difference to me whether I get out or not. All I want to do is to be about the Master's business. And I can do that here just as well as I can anywhere else. Things like that happened all the time. Talk about spiritual sight, he had it. Never had such fellowship with anyone. No matter what kind of naughty question I'd put to him, he had the genuine, real answer. He had great humility, a tremendous love, and one of the brightest minds you'd ever see. In my opinion, he had been transformed by the renewing of his mind, and he had taken on that mind that was also in Christ Jesus. He had gained his spiritual sight. Yet, Jesus of Nazareth might have passed him by. How easy it would have been for the Son of David, Jesus of Nazareth, to pass by, never to return his way again. It would have been mighty easy. But providence was with him, and Jesus of Nazareth answered that simple prayer of mine and set him free without making any manifestation, any appearance of any kind. No particular ecstatic experience. Just put him to sleep. Just put him to sleep and heal him. Now let us pray. Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Millions let him pass. Spiritual blindness is rampant. Yet he is the one who can heal blind eyes, both inner and outer eyes. Let us say to him tonight, Master, put the hands of your power upon my eyes, my inner eyes, and open them. For I have had eyes and see not, for I have had ears and hear not. Open my ears and open my eyes. Put upon me the hand of your compassion and unlock my mental and emotional and physical prison doors. And let me go.